Hello everyone, I'm Ceri Griffiths and I'm here at Katy Designs, and I want to introduce you to the latest addition to the Creative Cake system. And it's the Fabric Puff. The Fabric Puff silicone mould is the newest addition to this range. It's exciting, it's wonderful, and it does this. Now, before we get started, there are a few things we need to discuss. What am I putting into the mould? What I'm putting into the mould is any sugar paste or fondant that has had either Tylose powder or CMC added to it. We do have YouTubes out there telling you how much, but to be honest with you, it'll depend on the strength of your sugar paste or fondant as per the strength of the Tylose or the CMC powder you get. As a guide, the fondant or sugar paste I've been using for this exercise, I took 1 kilo, which is 2.2 pounds of fondant, and I added 8 grams of CMC or Tylose powder to it, and that just gave me something that's slightly firmer so it'll come out the mould, but not so firm that it couldn't be cut. So that's what I'm using in the moulds. Now if we take a look at the mould here, in the mould I've kept it quite compact. I've given you 3 full cavities which will turn into fabric puffs, and although you may not be able to notice it immediately, I've made them slightly different so that we don't have duplicate after duplicate of the fabric puff. We've got variations, so when you're actually using it, I usually work in a clockwise motion. That way I know I've got a good variety of all of them. The little ones on the sides here and here, I've added those should you wish to use them at the bottom edge of the fabric puff or the top edge. There is another way of doing the bottom edge and the top edge as well, but I thought just for those of you who may need them or come up with a different design, that's what they're there for. To prepare my mould, you could use cornstarch or corn flour. I tend to have very hot hands, therefore I tend to use a little bit of white vegetable fat, and we're talking the merest little smear of it, and it's only in there to actually release all of this beautiful juicy detail we have in here. We've worked quite deep. If you look at this mould, that's quite a depth of paste that's in there. It's thinner at the ends obviously, but we wanted to get those realistic creases and folds with it that would be in a fabric itself. I then take a ball of my modified or adjusted paste and I pop it in my mould. I'll take a bit of cornstarch or corn flour on my fingers so I don't stick, and I'll push it down into the mould. If I find I haven't got enough, I can just add another bit to the centre until I have. Work it to the very ends if you can. Word of advice, don't overfill this mould. The reason for that is there's quite a bit of paste and weight in this mould, so if you're adding it to the whole side of a tier or side of a cake, you're going to be adding weight to it, and we'll talk about that later on. So there you go, I push that in, just let the air around it, pop it around, pop it out, and there you have a realistic fabric puff. So how fun is that? That will replicate and replace rolling out a piece of fondant or sugar paste into a really thin sheet, then cutting into a rectangle, then pleating the edges and then sticking them on. This is so much faster, this is so much more commercial. This will help you work faster and achieve wow cakes. So let's look at the edges here. Let's take another piece. Now you'll note that when I actually rolled this one out, I rolled it into a ball. When I roll this one, I roll it into sort of a elongated teardrop shape. It's easier to start with a piece of paste that is roughly the shape of the mould you're working in. So put that in the mould. I tend to clean up the edges with my fingers. If I did have excess, I would wipe it off with my thumb pad. I'll open the mould out, I'll fold it back, and then once this is loosened, I can, oh, there you go, it's dropped out anyway. So that gives me a half one. Now there is an alternative as well. If I put the mould to one side, I can take a knife, should I choose, and I could cut this one right down the middle. And that would give me 2 halves. If I'm doing that method, I would use it at the bottom of my side of a cake. However, if I'm doing the top, I tend to do the moulded one because it's a cleaner finish than actually a cut finish. So let's pull some pieces out so you can actually see what they look like now once we've used them. So here's a few I moulded earlier. So I'm going to push these to one side a second. So what variations can I do? So let's pretend this is the side of my cake and this is where the cake drum or cake board is. Now, I would always recommend covering your cake or your tier in the cover you're going to make the fabric puffs in. And you will see why, because I've chosen a dark blue background specifically to make sure you can see what happens. So let's line up a few of these. Let's put one more over there. So I put that all the way around the cake initially, and then I will just slot the other puffs into it. Now, when it's on a cake, I would push them down slightly and make sure they stick to each other, so I wouldn't have as much as a gap. But you can see that's the reason why I've said have the gap, have the coating the same color as the puff to start with. So you can see I can really quickly build up an entire wall of these because they will all interlock. Now, on the cakes I've shown you and will show you later on, I've actually put a dragée in there or sugar pearl. You could put anything you like or nothing at all. You can see how quickly I can build this. It's just like building blocks. When I get to the top of the cake, this is where I can either slot in the other half ones, or I actually quite like them left like that's the top edge. Now, don't forget, this doesn't have to be the whole side of a cake. If I take these away, that can just be a border around the bottom tier. I could come in and I could put these in if I so chose, and that means I've got a fabric ribbon around the bottom. So lots of ways to use those. There's another one that I like to do, and I will show you a sample of this later on as well. If I take my fabric puffs and turn them this way, I can actually have them going up the side of the cake. Now, obviously, if this is the bottom edge of a cake, I do need to come in and cut these in half so that I do have a bottom edge for them. A simple enough job to do. And then when I got to the top edge of the cake, I could do the same thing at the top. Also, let's think outside the box here. It doesn't just have to be up and down. Because they're individual pieces, I could quite easily do a nice border all the way around the side of my cake as well. Another way to use them. One that would be quite a cute thing to do if you've got a fabric cake. There's no reason why you can't make fancy flowers out of this. How cute would they look if you're doing a really nice, say, a christening cake or something, and you put all these little fabric flowers around it? Just really, really cute and quick. Something that'll add texture and add detail. What I could do then is I could come in and I could probably put maybe a button or something in the middle. So it's a really, really versatile mould. Basically, whatever you want to do with it, you can do. It just adds little elements to it. A lovely way to use this mould. So let's just reiterate a few of the things I've said I've done. So I'm using modified paste, modified or adjusted, whichever video you tend to watch, and that is purely any sugar paste or fondant with Tylose or CMC powder to it, and the ratio of Tylose powder, CMC, to fondant or sugar paste will be determined by the strength of the CMC or the Tylose powder, the strength of the fondant or the sugar paste, and your ambient climate. If you're in a really humid country, you may need to add more CMC or Tylose. What you're looking for is a paste that actually comes straight out of the mould and can still be cut and won't firm up completely solid. There are brands out there on the market that you can use straight out of the packet, but as a general, I would add CMC or Tylose to it. So let's put those to one side. I've prepared my pink pieces for the next cake. As you can see next to me, I've got a 6x4 cake ready to go. I've prepared all of my pieces about an hour ago, and I put them on a tray and I put some plastic wrap over the top of them just to keep them fresh so that you don't see me standing here mould press. I'm using edible glue to put them on. I'm not putting a lot of edible glue on it because I don't want them to be too sticky and moisten the cake too much. Now, I do need to talk about if this was a real cake. I would not recommend putting the moulded pieces directly onto a buttercream surface because pretty much in transit with the movement and maybe the warmth, they could slip and slide. However, if you did a normal cake and you gave it a crumb coat or coating of buttercream and then put sugar paste or fondant on as I have done here and then attach them to top, it'll be perfectly well. The most secure version is probably doing a ganache coat, then putting your fondant or sugar paste on and then attaching them to that. So we'll talk more about that later on, and I do have an example to show you. So let's have a look and see what this cake looks like as I add the new pieces to it. So I took the opportunity on this cake to show you both finishes. As you can see, I could have done this all the way around the cake, although as you can see by this section here, I actually can do it as a smaller border. Something that works wonderful with anything that's textured is if you add some shimmer or lustre to it, or pearl. So I've got a piece of kitchen towel or kitchen paper here, and I've got some pink shimmer dust here. This could be any brand you choose. It doesn't have to be any particular brand. And you could actually have the same effect by airbrushing. So don't forget you've got airbrush, you can do it. I take a large soft brush, I load my brush up, and I come in and I'll do a section of this, and I'll leave a section of it undone just so you can actually see what the difference is between the two. And I think you'll love it as much as I do. Don't get too much on it. Now, if I was concerned about my board or the drum of my cake, I would do this before I put it on the drum. But to be honest, I was going to do the drum anyway, so there you go. If you're using an airbrush, obviously, you have to treat it as you would be with airbrushing any different project. You have to regard overspray. You have to look at the angles at which you're actually airbrushing at. So take all of those on board. If there's one or two things I will say about this method too, is I've tried to make each of the cushions the right length or the right width to go around any size cake, but you can squish them slightly, you can elongate them slightly. It's only ever going to be a fraction of an inch out anyway, so you can stretch it that little bit or just add that little bit. So let's just finish off, give it a bit of a polish. As I said, I'm doing one bit that is dusted and one that isn't. Just tidy that up. Let's put this to one side because I'm renowned for dropping pots of dust all over my floor. So the lid on there, and take that to one side so I don't end up wearing it. So this is the side, this is undusted. So let's turn this to the overhead. So if we look, that's the side as it was. So side as it was, and that's the difference when you lustre it. So can you imagine if this was a little girl's fairy princess cake, or if it was a wedding cake and this was white and white or ivory and white? And as you can see there, I just dusted the border itself, but you can get a very similar effect with airbrushes, and there's some lovely brands of lustres out there. You could even go in with metallics on this one. So let's take a look at some examples so I can show you what I actually was discussing in that section. Let's have a look then. So bringing my wedding cake in, as you can see, on the wedding cake here, I've actually used them all the way up the side, and I've used them around the top edge as well. And I put a sugar pearl or sugar dragée in there. Wonderful to cover the whole side, but as I said, I can do it as a band around the bottom. And as you can see here on the top, you get a really nice framed top of the cake. Now this is a 4x4 tier. This could be bigger, and obviously you get more and more detail, and great way you can put any element in there you want. So this is how it would be normally used. So let's put this one to one side. Now let's take a look at a more contemporary use of this. So in this one, I've actually done it up the side of the cake, and I've done it vertically. And as you can see around here, I've actually done the half ones, as I said, and I haven't gone all the way to the top, but I could have come up to the top, and I could have come in maybe as far as here, but this gives you another way to use it. As you can see, I put double dragées on here as well, just to show a different variation on this. Now, if I come across to this one, this is actually it without any dragées on it or anything whatsoever. And I think I'll tip this one on the side just slightly so you can see. There you go, that's what it looks like, just completely naked on its own. And this is a 6x4, so this shows you how the bigger the cake, the more delicate this edge would be. And I could use other things in here. I could use small blossoms, I could put a small element, I could put anything I wish within those. If I didn't want to do the rest of it, as you can see, it looks beautiful just as it is with just a satin finish onto it. So I wanted to address some possible concerns you might have about using the new mould. I have stated that you're adding extra weight to a wedding cake, to a single tier cake, to any celebration cake. As an example, the 3-tier wedding cake I showed you, which was an 8, 6 and 4 by 4 inch tall wedding cake, when I added the extra molded pieces onto it, it was about 750 grams or 1.5 pounds more fondant on the cake. So you have to respect that. You have to know that it's going to be in your pricing. Also, that's quite a bit of weight to be on the side of a cake. So, warning again, please do not use this mold directly onto buttercream, as I believe it could shift and slide. You can crumb coat or dirty coat your cake in buttercream, then cover it in sugar paste or fondant, whichever brand you choose, and then attach it to that. Or you could ganache your cake and then attach your sugar paste or fondant to that, and then attach these to that sugar paste or fondant. And because we're really thorough here at Katy Sue in our testing, I wanted to put it to a test. So this cake's a real cake. So let me just tell you the timeline. So today is Monday. Saturday afternoon, I baked myself a tall Madeira cake. Now, Madeira cake is probably the equivalent of American pound cake. It's a high density sponge, that sort of generation, not a Victoria sandwich. It's a sponge or a cake that I would use for a wedding cake anyway. It's not a soft crumb, it's a firm crumb. It's probably the one that you'd carve cakes from. So I took my Madeira cake, I baked it on Saturday. Next morning, Sunday morning, I torted it, I trimmed it, I filled it with buttercream, covered it in buttercream. The buttercream I used was British buttercream, so therefore it's just butter with confectioner's sugar or icing sugar. So it's not got any crusting agent, it's got no stabilizer or anything in it, it's purely just butter and icing sugar or confection sugar. I thought that way, that's probably the softest buttercream I would use while I'm doing a wedding cake. I then covered the whole thing in sugar paste or fondant. It was about 2 mil thick, possibly 3 at that, what I would normally use to cover my wedding cake. I then immediately added all of my fabric puffs to it. That took me to about Sunday lunchtime. I then put the cake in a cake box and I left it sat on my kitchen counter all the way through the night to the next morning. The next morning I drove from my home down to here, which took about 6.5 to 7 hours. So I drove it for that amount of time and it was on the back seat of my car. And as you can see, not a single piece fell off, not a single thing was damaged on it. It didn't buckle or bow or anything. Part of the reason for that is because you've added Tylose powder or CMC powder to the sugar paste, it's actually encased it, and as it firms up, as I said, it's not going to set hard, but it's going to be slightly firmer than normal sugar paste or fondant possibly, and that's why it's encased it. So, Ceri with a knife. That's a scary thought. So, just to prove the point, if I take my knife and I cut down, let's see if I can just take this one slice out. Proof, it was a real cake, guys. It was a full butter Madeira cake. What it's probably not going to work for if you have really light cakes like a very soft chiffon cake, if you've got a very light carrot cake, if you've got an extremely moist chocolate cake, just do a little bit of a tester. So that was the continuous cake system fabric puff silicone mold. Hope you love it as much as I do. As you can see, I played around with it a little bit, been quite versatile. I'm really excited to see what you do with it. Stunning detail, lovely texture. Hope you enjoy it as much as I do, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye now.